Good evening, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all to the corporate overview and scrutiny meeting. It's now 7 o'clock and I'd like to start the meeting. Welcome. I'd also like to remind everyone that the meeting is being live streamed and recorded for publication on the Council's website, so if you would like to leave and not be filmed, now's your opportunity. I've also asked today, for your information, there are no fire alarms due for this evening, so if you do hear one, please make your way to the nearest fire exit. Item 1. Is there any apologies of absence, please?
So we've had apologies from Councillor Holloway, and we've got Councillor Muldowney subbing, and we've had apologies from Councillor Churchman, and we've got Councillor Anderson subbing.
Okay, thank you. And we have the minutes, item 2. Can I move the minutes for the corporate overview and scrutiny meeting held on the 12th of July to be approved as a correct record? Are there any comments?
Agreed.
All agreed. We're now going to move to item 4. This has been moved ahead on the agenda today. Just to allow any members if they've got any declarations of interest. That's a no. Item 3. We've all had the briefing note sent out to us, so we've all had a chance to read it through. Does anybody have any comments on this briefing note, please? Okay, Councillor Muldowney.
Thank you. Presumably this is to Jonathan? Yeah. Okay, well, thank you for the briefing note. Obviously, it's a rapidly changing situation. I think the big thing that's missing from this briefing note is the change in interest rates. I presume there's going to be a change in interest rates when we switch over from into authority loans to the Public Works Loan Board.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, I've made reference to that in the report, but the actual work, so the process has obviously just started, so we're just replacing debt in the last couple of weeks. So we're doing it on a staged way, weekly, through to the end of the year. So we will pick that up in the... sorry, Councillor. Did you want to... Oh, sorry, I thought something had happened. So we're taking it on a weekly basis, so we're calculating that as we go. That will become part of our reporting. So yes, the rates are increasing. The rates on average that we've taken out so far are roughly 4.5% on average. It's got up slightly higher than that for 1 week, and obviously continues to be monitored. We are replacing on a weekly basis because the debt we are replacing is redeemable on a weekly basis. So we're replacing that with the PWLB funding. That is considered to be the cheapest available source of finance to replace the existing debt. And obviously in our situation in intervention, that is the accessible debt that's available at this point in time. And while wider options have been considered, as you can imagine, our access to wider markets is difficult at the moment.
Okay, can I just confirm what was the rate of interest we were
borrowing
at?
Sure. So it varies, obviously, but some of the pre-existing debt is between 0.5% and up to broadly about 3.5%. So depending on when it was taken out and the length of time it was taken out.
So that's a major increase then from
Absolutely.
Like 0.75% to now
Yep.
4.5%. And I know in one of the reports that you've said that there's one of the risks is further interest rate rises. Obviously, that's still continuing.
So we've got a significant risk. The risk as a whole is being reassessed both in the current year and for the medium-term financial strategy. So we take a longer-term view. We're using Treasury management advice on the longer-term rates, but as you say, they're very volatile at the moment. So we've been in a very stable environment for a long time, and now that's not the case, clearly. We continue to assess that alongside the commissioners, and we will bring back reports confirming the current position at the time we bring it, but obviously it remains subject to change.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but when we've previously been briefed about this by Sean, at that point, public loan board borrowing was 1.5%. So even our tranche that we've got that was already with the public loan board is also going to have quite a marked increase in interest charges.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. As it matures, you are subject to the prevailing rate. There's some variation depending on what length of time you take replacement debt over. Part of the reason for this approach is to sort of replace that debt initially, so we can obviously resolve the issue of being able to redeem debt with other local authorities, but also to create kind of a breathing space period whereby we can reset the entire Treasury strategy and alongside it the capital strategy. That's obviously a key part of the intervention directions. So that is the specific piece of work that will then go on alongside this. And ultimately, when this debt is then redeemed, we will then reset that in a new way based on the outcome of that approach.
Right. Okay. And the actual impact. Have you got a ballpark figure of the impact of that?
Well, it's moving. So we will bring back quarter two position. I don't want to confirm a figure at the moment because it is fluctuating significantly, and obviously this debt is being replaced and is fluctuating weekly. So as we've got 836 million, so we're a very short journey into that first part of the 836. But we will definitely bring back an estimate for quarter two, and that will come back shortly. But you can imagine the rate increase is significant, as you said.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Kent.
So can I just explore that a little further, because it's a kind of gap in my knowledge and my understanding. So on the day of the Chancellor's mini-budget, the Public Works Loans Board interest rate went from, 3.96% to 5.31%. So does that mean that those first loans that we've taken out from the Public Works Loans Board are now at 5.3%?
No, we take them out at the prevailing rate for the agreed period.
So that would have been at 3.96%. But it will mean that those for the 29th of September, 3rd of October, 11th of October will be at 5.3%.
If that's the prevailing rate, it actually drops slightly.
So sorry, when you talk about the prevailing rate, the bit that I don't understand, so please unpack it for me, is that the PWLB rate is linked to government bonds, isn't it?
Yes, that's right.
So it can kind of fluctuate.
Yeah, absolutely.
A little. So what's the rate today?
I can't tell exactly today, but it went over, as you say, it went over 5. It came back down to 4 the day before yesterday, 4.9.
Right.
And it went back up again shortly afterwards. We tend to get 2 rates per day,
Okay.
and the Treasury team obviously monitor it.
Okay.
At the weekly point, we set on that day at that rate, and that's
So you must have done some modelling, which gives you a kind of ballpark estimate of the extra interest debt payments that this authority will be making over the next 18 months. So
absolutely.
So what is that ballpark figure?
Well, the ballpark figure's fluctuating, and it's subject to, we're doing a major assessment on the MTFS at the moment. So we, as part of the intervention, are agreeing that MTFS process is part of that process. So it will come back. But obviously, significant increase on debt. We're recycling 836 million. At the moment, it's on average at 4.5% compared to probably on average around 1% probably. So it's that differential that we'll be looking at. So
2.5% on 800 million would be something in the region of £20 million increase.
It's definitely significant amounts. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Chair, my second point is just a bit about process.
Yeah.
So, loans have been taken out. This has been agreed. Because some things that have been done in the past have been done with a lack of transparency, take me through the process for agreeing to take out these loans, for agreeing to take this action, which, as you've said, buys us some time. How was this agreed?
So, obviously, two things have happened that have limited our access to the existing market. So the first thing that happened was the Treasury Management Advisors, Arlene Close, issued guidance to other local authorities in response to the story in the Daily Mail and some wider market knowledge to not lend to the council. So that created initially very limited access to the market for a very short period of time, and then the local authority market was available in some form but in a much more limited way. Then the second thing clearly was the intervention itself. So the intervention itself happened and was announced on the 2nd of September. The market access at that point pretty much was not accessible, essentially. So then the process from that point was to work with the commissioners and the department to agree, one, whether the funding was available, first of all, and what we had to do in order to have that conversation was understand the requirements and how the approach would be taken to take down the debt over the forthcoming period. So the department needed to understand the level of debt, the timing of redemption, so we went through that process with them. They needed to understand in the background the potential scale of issue we are currently facing, and then they needed to come to a judgment on our ability to refinance that debt first of all, and ultimately there will be a judgment on repayment, but in the short term the conversation was obviously around redemption of existing local authority debt in that context. Now, there was then a discussion about how we bring it down and whether we bring it down in a certain way. And our commissioners' advice very much was their directions are around ensuring we have a compliant treasury management strategy. So in order to work through that process, obviously that's a significant technical document. We need to revisit that. And while that period was happening, we've effectively created a short-term replacement to the local authority market, taken ourselves out of that market, but given ourselves roughly that the loans are a year in length. And that at that point, we will have reassessed our entire capital programme, investment programme, and then we will start resetting the debt to align with the revised programme. So there was obviously comment back from the department and some iterations of this, and then we arrived at the agreed approach, and that was agreed by Commissioners DLUC and Treasury.
And within this authority, by
Councillor
Snell or,
yep.
or predecessor as finance portfolio holder, leader of the council, Ian Wake as acting.
Yes,
paid service?
absolutely, with the leader, with the chief executive, and with wider discussion prior to that.
Thank you.
Is there any further questions from anybody? Oh, sorry. Cap.
I think Councillor Kent raises a very good point about how rates can change over time and what flexibility is built into the approach. So that, say, worst comes to it, the repayment amounts increase massively. What flexibility is in the system to allow for that?
Well, I think we're in a conversation now with the department, and we've agreed an approach that largely we had to put in place to address the short-term issues of being able to redeem local authority debt when it matures, so i.e. meet our obligations. In terms of the rates, we will be subject to the rates for the year of each loan, and during that period, you know, as we are already experiencing, we are at risk, at interest rate risk. So we have to accept that that's the risk, and that's the approach the commissioners agreed and the department were satisfied with. But most of that debt is for a year in length, and at that point, the strategy is very much then reset in the context of, one, we can look at wider options, two, we're resetting based on our updated capital strategy, which includes that reassessment of the investment programme, capital programme, and that then enables us to set a more sort of balanced approach which matches the expectations of the assets which this funds. So I suppose the short answer is we are exposed to the risk. The longer answer is we've got wider conversations to talk to the department about, and then those conversations ultimately may include some consideration of flexibilities, but in the short term we are solving two problems. One, that we need to reset the strategy, give ourselves time to do so, and two, we need to meet our obligations with our local authority lenders.
Just to confirm, so everybody's clear, and for those who may be listening also that are clear, that this arrangement is not paying off any debt, it's merely refinancing it, and unfortunately at a much higher rate of interest, so that's actually going to add to the overall debt.
That's correct.
So we're talking about, in terms of these loans, the best part of £1 billion. I mean, how did we get to this position where we owe so much money? I mean, our net budget is, 151 million now? I mean, back when this was going on, it's probably nearer to 120 million. So what was the strategy for paying this
So the capital strategy and investment strategy have obviously been set in previous years. Ultimately, the capital, what does the borrowing pay? So the borrowing ultimately is the reflection of our capital investment programme. So broadly, the balance sheet for previous years has reflected a debt figure which broadly represents the total of our capital and investment programme. Obviously, with wider issues that we are considering as part of the intervention, that may not be the case, so there's the potential for gaps in the balance between investments, capital and borrowing, and that remains under assessment. So obviously that balance represents previous decisions made by the council across the capital and investment programme.
Okay, so we don't know how it all got so out of hand, really. It sounds like.
I suppose in terms of, I think, to answer what I think you're asking, I suppose we have, so as part of the intervention, there's two streams of work. There's obviously a forward-looking piece, which this is part of, which is about resetting our strategies, updating policies, and responding to, I think, as the intervention said, the scale of financial risk the council is exposed to, which is what you're alluding to. The part about the journey to get to that point is the subject broadly of the BV inspection, which is happening in parallel. So the BV inspection started, effectively it started this week with a document review, moves on next week through a further process and discussions with officers and members, and ultimately concludes as currently planned on the 3rd of January. So the 3rd of January, the Secretary of State receives a report from the BV inspection team, commissioned by Essex County Council, and at a point subsequently that report will ultimately be published and in the public domain, and that will then conclude on what broadly you just asked in terms of how that journey took us to that point.
And just to clarify something else, just to finish, the investment borrowing that we did and the investments that we made, none of those are secured.
It's not quite, well, it's definitely not a simple answer to that. There's a process going on to assess all of the investments, and that will be part of the BV inspection. There will be conclusions drawn, and we will all be able to see the conclusions. So I think it's fair to say that, widely across the council, both officers and members will be, able to see the findings and make informed judgments at that point.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the briefing note. I was wondering if you could sort of set out what the alternatives were to the route we're taking with this. So you've put a briefing note in front of us that sets out, these loans we're taking from the PWLB. I was just wondering if you could set out why we've taken this route and sort of what the other alternatives would have been.
So, I mean, obviously the alternative route we've used to date is the local authority market, which is a market that's been available for, 100 years plus. Obviously, that market's not available. The wider access in the situation the council's in, as you can imagine, to go out to the market to secure equivalent debt, one, is unlikely to be possible given the situation we're in, and two, certainly wouldn't be available at the rates that PWLB is available to local authorities at. So the short answer is it's a question of access and availability, and also its affordability, because that is likely to be the cheapest route available, and almost certainly is. So that was considered in conjunction with the commissioners and the department, and the very clear steer from commissioners and department was obviously in that context was to use PWLB. So.
Any further questions? No, doesn't appear so. Well, thank you very much for that, Jonathan. Obviously, we've all read that through with interest over the last few days. I wouldn't really want to sort of add too much to that in a minute. I'd just like to sum up, just so we can move forward. During the last few weeks, we've all been aware of Thurrock Council's financial situation, and it's obviously been very concerning for us. But I would hope, like me and all members and residents, we've found an extra briefing. We found this extra briefing very positive and a step for reassuring all of us that we as a council now have a robust plan, and we are able to pay our debts. I am aware that the leader is actually writing to every local authority who's lent us funds, confirming that they will be receiving all their money at the appropriate times. So really today is all about going through the first steps on our road to recovery, acknowledging the changes to our financial position in going forward, and making it easier for each of us to work out what is best for Thurrock moving forwards. So thank you very much. Here's another report being read to us by Jonathan Wilson. Thank you.
Okay, I'll try not to read the whole report, but open for questions. But I'll just give a brief summary, because the context of this report was developed quite a while ago now, and circumstances meant originally would have been at Cabinet, but unfortunately events moved and Cabinet was cancelled, and there was a debate whether to bring this report in the context of the intervention. Now, the intervention's referenced in here, but the intervention came about very close to the publication of this date, and a decision was made to provide as much information on the wider service position to members, but appreciating the Treasury position in the context of the briefing note we've just discussed is dramatically going to move and will be brought back at Q2. So that consideration of interest rate risk we've just discussed will definitely be part of that subsequent report. But more broadly, when we are in a position to confirm if and the extent of any capital loss, that will be part of that position, although it may not attach to this financial year, which is important to note, and also wider impacts if we, as one of the intervention directions suggests, we update our MRP policy, which will also potentially bring a revenue impact. And I think it's probably just worth, before coming to the detail of the report itself, probably just saying that those impacts will be potentially significant. The council will be required to, it's our problem as a council. There are solutions with the department, but as people probably more broadly may know, intervention in this of this type, and there is examples around the country, often result in a financial position that looks completely unsustainable in terms of budget setting for a future period. But there's mechanisms to work with the department to address your issues over the longer term, and therefore effectively spread the issue that ultimately will be identified. And that assessment is ongoing, but as are assessments of relevant investments that people have no doubt read about in local press and wider press, and those positions are fluctuating. So there's a limited level of certainty on that at the moment. But they will come back, and we will have to consider that alongside our normal service pressures, which this report has aimed to bring to ensure that that regular monitoring of service positions is also happening in parallel with the wider work on investments, which is obviously significant at the moment. So in that context, this service pressure figure in Table 1 is a significant one, and the Treasury position does include the initial assessment at that point in time, and remember that interest rates at the end of Quarter 1 were very different to the interest rates now. But it doesn't go on to then make that assessment. We will bring that forward as the fuller impacts of the process are sort of manifest themselves, and we can then bring those back to the committee. The headline prior to that, and it seems like a long time ago, but prior to that we were working through a solution for next year on the basis of some service pressures this year and the impact of some of the approaches this year. We've got some short-term measures to balance this year's budget. So we were working through to the 23-4 position. But this current year, before all the investment pressures, was already a challenge due to the service pressures listed. And when you come through the reports into page 24 and 25, you can see where those service pressures arose in terms of directorates in Table 1. And on page 25 in Table 2, what we've set out is how the key variances attached to specific pressures in the services. And what I would broadly say, in common with many authorities, we've got, many authorities have got challenge full stop, but they attach to social care pressures, demand increases, particularly in adult social care at the moment. That broadly will be met by some reserves we have aside. We anticipated some of those pressures. We've got children's social care pressures, but probably at lower levels than historic years, so it's reasonably, it's not on that scale we've experienced in previous years. We've got some positive stories around the counter-fraud team and the work they're doing with central government, but we've also got those wider inflationary and utility pressures, and we've got some further impacts in schools transport particularly. And then finally, we've got some employee cost pressures which attach to the level of vacant posts we're holding, and that again is being monitored throughout the year, and we'll come back to that as the year evolves. So we had a challenging year already. Those inflationary pressures and interest rate pressures that accrue already are coming through, and on top of that we are awaiting the final assessment of, it won't be a final assessment, it will be the best assessment we have at a point in time with when relevant information is available on the overall investment position, and then there will be the part around the assessment of minimum revenue provision, which for those who are not familiar with is essentially how we write down our debt over time. So I'll pause there, Chair, because I think there's probably two sets of questions I'm anticipating. One's probably linked back to the first conversation we've had around the intervention, and then the second is around the standard service pressures that we experience as an authority, and happy to take questions on either, both.
Councillor Kent.
It would be really helpful if you could just take us through what the MRP is, how it works, please.
So minimum revenue position, as I said, it's how you write down your debt, essentially, as an authority. And broadly, it largely always attached to capital expenditure, and the capital expenditure, in simple terms, if you had an asset over a 50-year life, you would write it down over the 50-year life with an MRP charge, say. That charge is assessed relevant in conjunction with the asset that the borrowing funds. So where it's property, it's fairly standard. We attach life to property, we get a valuation, the life is the life, and broadly your MRP would match the life of that asset. I think where the distinction is between capital assets and property and capital investment that we had. The capital investment approach was the assumption was we had bonds in investments and the bonds have got a maturity date. The maturity date, if the bond is in operation for its life and matures, obviously the funding from the bond pays back the debt which was taken out to fund it in the first place. So MRP on investment was based on an assessment annually of the valuation of that investment at any point in time, or the bond, and then a judgment is made about whether MRP is needed. So if there was 10% written off an investment or anticipated to be written off the company that a bond is in, then you would consider making a 10% provision, simply. Now that assessment has happened annually. Obviously, the situation we're in now, we need to make that assessment, and if there is, and almost certainly is, a write-off, a significant write-off, it would be in the form of an accelerated MRP. So if we find, an investment value is written down by 20-30%, 20-30% would be charged as MRP. So hopefully, does that help, Councillor?
Yeah, I think it's just useful that everybody kind of has an understanding of what it is, how it works, if not necessarily the kind of figures, because as I understand the figures, they'll be different next week to this.
Any more questions? Oh, sorry, Councillor Madani.
Yeah, so obviously we've got the pressures that are going to come from the refinancing of the loans at higher interest rates. I'm surprised to hear the Chair call that a positive move, because actually, it's positive that other local authorities are getting paid back, but it's certainly not positive that it's going to mean more financial hardship for Thurrock and Thurrock's residents. But we do have these other pressures that we had anyway. And I see that you've outlined some of the risks. So, I mean, inflation, for example. So it's currently nearly 10% at the moment. Obviously, we've had the government being quite clear that they're not going to increase local authority spending to cover that inflation increase. So that's quite a significant biting into our budget there. How are those costs going to be covered?
So, just on the local government settlement, usually we get an indication of that at the end of this month, and then clarification of our allocation in December. Broadly, I think what you said is the indications that are coming out, but obviously it's still subject to assessment, etc. In terms of the budget itself, the first thing we obviously do every year is update the medium-term financial strategy. So there's 3 or 4 particular stages probably to highlight. There's the investment position itself. So the impact of that, and if we required a capitalisation direction, effectively what happens is that attaches to our balance sheet, so a gap would be capitalised essentially. So it's like having an asset, a property asset, for example, and a life is attached to it, and that broadly, usually, is 20 years in other examples, but that is subject to discussion and agreement with the department. So there's that part. The interest position we've talked about, that needs to be assessed. Broadly, that at the levels potentially it's at is probably unsustainable, so would also be part of the consideration of a capitalisation direction. And equally the MRP that I've just described, depending on the method we end up with, because we're agreeing a new policy, and we've got to balance the expectation of the relevant asset with a need to make provision, but it will be additional charge and it could be significant. So all those areas are definitely consideration for the capitalisation direction. The service pressures, we had already, as an organisation, undertaken service review at the start of the year. So we had already increased our MTFS gap to 13 million broadly at that point, and we had then found a range of savings, and broadly 9 million had been agreed, 3 million to be agreed, and there was a relatively small gap, still a significant number, but and a process in place to achieve that. So that part is where we need to make sure we deliver our part of that process. That's what we're working through as directors and with members. So broadly, we will be left in a position where we make an assessment of a gap and how it attaches. And I did mention earlier, it attaches to certain years. And what I mean by that is if we have an issue with an investment, it's not necessarily that it attaches to this year. It may be it attaches back into our open audit year if there's clear indication that when the new information comes forward, that it indicates things were happening at a point in time in a given company. So, for example, if COVID was an issue in a company, that could attach back into 2021. And 2021 is our open year for audit. And that year is obviously, the audit is kind of on hold while we work through some of the intervention issues. And we will then have, effectively, we'd seek a capitalisation direction potentially back in a previous year, which sounds quite unusual, but is actually the situation at Slough at the moment. So they have made some historic assessments of years, and they've attached a capitalisation direction request to each of those years. And that's going backwards quite a number of years, but also they're making assessments going forwards. And therefore, they then work with the department to agree that approach. But separately, they're also looking at a much longer timescale to assess what's possible in terms of recovery and over a longer period. And that part of the process is obviously crucial for the department to understand ultimately what the route to resolve the issues are. So ultimately, with the department's support, you are able to set a budget for next year, but you are equally expected as a council to take every action you can possibly take to resolve your own issues alongside any support that comes from government. And that includes, wider consideration of other items. So at Slough, they've got a significant capital release programme, and they're funding some of their issue with capital receipts because you get a wider flexibility to use capital receipts to help resolve an issue. That part, we're in the assessment phase and agreeing where those gaps are, the size of them, and that part of the issue is then to bring the department to a place where they understand the scale of the problem, which they broadly do, but they want to see it in that level of detail so we all know what potential capitalisation directions we're asking for and to which year. We've obviously got to have a conversation with the auditors. Ultimately, they've got to agree and sign off those statements. And then we're in a position where we need to take those actions. So obviously, in parallel, there's a number of discussions going on with commissioners and the department, which is very much extending our current process, but also bringing in wider consideration of our options. And I think it's getting to that point with options, because then you're in consideration of whether you're making sustainable, deliverable savings that the council can continue to function and deliver its statutory requirements and services, as opposed to another approach could be obviously a much more dramatic reduction in service, but there are potential knock-on consequences. So a good example would be we could cut, for instance, preventative services and children's services, but the impact of that would be almost certainly our Ofsted inspection would deteriorate significantly, and the impact of that would be we would have to spend significantly more money. So that is not a sustainable solution. So we need to work through with commissioners around sustainable solutions, and that includes in our consideration of assets, And interestingly, work with the commissioners has identified at other sites that even in the asset sale route, there is wider consideration, obviously, given to the impact on the relevant boroughs and how, again, how sustainable that is for the community. So it is bringing it into a sort of more nuanced, appropriate conversation, and that includes the direction itself and the period over which we require it, because 20 years may not be a sufficient period for if we've got a significant scale problem. I'm referencing back to your point about the relevance of the investment scale to the budget, but very much as part of the commissioning team, we've got a member of the DLUC team as part of that team, and so it enables a very proactive conversation with them, and they and commissioners will then talk to their wider commissioners and also back to the department to develop those approaches. Ultimately, the aim of the intervention is to bring us back to a sustainable footing. So we need to consider and understand how that's achievable. And, we're at the start of that journey very much. And obviously the intervention directions are for 3 years. So it's already a significant journey. But this first 3-month period is really setting the parameters of how we get the sort of key, baseline positions in to then make that assessment and move on from there.
Okay, so in summary, it would be fair to say that this is just the beginning of the bad news, really, in terms of pressures. I mean, we've got pressures in adult social care as well, and children's social care, which are obviously national pressures.
Yes. Yeah.
And there's no sign of them.
No.
Solution to those, or those getting any better.
Well, they're sort of national issues that are experienced across the board, and obviously there's significant changes to the funding of social care and adult social care particularly, and we've got those wider considerations as well. Yes, there's a significant challenge for us as a council to face, and we have to engage with commissioners and DLUC to make sure, all relevant views across the council from members and officers inform those discussions and help shape that solution. And I think that's absolutely critical at the moment.
And so, you say that 20 years may not be long enough to actually resolve the situation across. So we're looking at 30, 40?
Well,
Could we be looking
examples,
at 40 years or more?
Well, I think it's an ongoing discussion with the department, but it needs to be, ultimately, for us to be sustainable, it needs to be a sustainable solution. So that very much we need to consider the impact of whatever period attaches to it. I think the methodology they've had is sort of historic in some senses, in that, there are other councils with significant problems as well, and 20 years may not work for them either. But that is the starting point. That's how the guidance operates as it currently stands. So that's our starting point, and I certainly can't promise it won't be that. But what we can say is we need to have the sustainable conversation, and that's critical.
Thank you.
Any other quick? Councillor Kent.
In the budget that was set back in February this year, there was £3 million taken out of earmarked reserves to help bridge the gap, wasn't there? And this evening, we're told that there's another £6 million being taken out of those earmarked reserves.
So there's a specific earmarked reserve which was planned to be used to support the budget. Mm-hmm. But alongside that, we've got service-specific reserves, and the service-specific reserves attached to those services to support them in times when they're required. And the obvious example in the report is the adult social care reserve, for example. Yes. So those reserves are always there to provide that support, and yes, that support is required at the moment. That's absolutely right. And that reflects, particularly in adult social care, post-COVID, there's a significant additional demand, particularly around older people and older people's services. So, yes, that's the context.
Okay, but that figure is right.
Yes, that's right.
It's 9 million.
Yeah.
So, in the executive summary, we're told further use of transformation reserves balance in Table 4. When we move to Table 4, there isn't a transformation reserve there. Is it something that's got two names?
Just bear with me.
I'd quite like to know how much is left of the transformation reserve.
The financial resilience reserve is the 3 million. The Table 4 is just picking up the specific service-based reserves.
So the financial resilience reserve is the transformation reserve?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
I don't want to be unfair because you're kind of finance, but I just wanted to pick up on one specific issue here, which is home to school transport.
Yeah.
We, as elected members, know through our casework that there are a number of young people, especially young people with special education needs, who seem to kind of arbitrarily have had their transport withdrawn. I'm concerned about the process that's led to that, but I'm also concerned that if arbitrary decisions are being made on something like home to school transport to save money, then those kind of decisions are being made elsewhere. I'd really like some comfort that there aren't risky decisions being taken in, for instance, adult social care, child social care.
I don't think that's the case, Councillor, but the example you're giving, I obviously would need more detail to understand the specific cases, and I'm sure perhaps you've written to relevant services. I think the general feeling I get with home to school transport from the financial perspective is actually it's quite challenging to, the caseload tends to increase over time. We've obviously increased our special educational needs facilities in recent year, and that has brought additional demand into the service, obviously, but also that the rules and regulations around it are quite specific and have to be applied in line with the statutory guidance. So that's certainly not the impression I've had. I would say home to school transport obviously sits inside the general fund rather than the dedicated schools grant,
yes.
And obviously you've kind of got a separation of that school function from the DSG itself, and ultimately there's limited control from a budgetary perspective we can place on it because the statutory requirements are clear. I suppose in terms of budget setting, it's quite difficult to, it's become a pressure. The budgets are obviously tight at the council. It's a it's a pressure you can't effectively manage. It's linked to numbers and statutory requirements. But I think, like all policies, it's subject to review periodically to make sure it's functioning in the right way. I think in the sector, it's had a particular focus because it is an increasing pressure on councils, and therefore is ultimately needs to be the funding is coming from sources that were funding alternative services to ensure that that budget is met. So yeah, it's a challenge. It's but I don't get the impression it's not being applied correctly in terms of the process. But the process itself would obviously be subject to a conversation with relevant service.
It doesn't detract from the point that there are young people who have historically had home to school transport to get to a special school who aren't now getting that home to school transport, so therefore are no longer going to school. And I do have to say that it's just an example of kind of some of the lack of joined up thinking, that we support a free school bid for a special school and don't properly consider the impact that's going to have on home to school transport or the budget. And I think there are examples like that are just pepper potted around the place. Can I just link the previous item, the briefing note, to this?
Yeah.
So just using very kind of block figures,
yeah.
we kind of got to the agreement that the increase in interest payments over the period would be about £20 million. It's over about 18 months, so that looks to be about £1 million a month. So that's another pressure of 6 million to come in to this median to balance the books this year. Is that right?
It's under assessment, so I'm not going to quote the figure because I don't want to give you the wrong figure, but we'll come back. But yes, it's definitely a pressure to the extent, obviously, it applies from the point we start redeeming that debt, absolutely. So we've got broadly from mid-September onwards through to the rest of the year. Obviously, as that period goes on, the interest will obviously attract to a shorter period, so there'll be less impact as the year goes on, but then we are left with the impact into the following year. So absolutely, though. Yes, and it applies back to the when we're assessing that interest cost and pressure alongside any capital cost, alongside any MRP, are already attracting and under consideration as part of the intervention response.
Okay. So. And you spoke about asset sales and kind of being able to just take the money to prop up the budget, which is a relatively new departure. I think this year's budget has £3.3 million worth of asset sales baked into it.
Yeah.
Can you tell us how close we are to making that 3.3?
Yeah. So for the budget, that's already been made. So we expect to meet that 3.3 target for the budget. So, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? No? Oh, very sorry, Councillor Kent.
No, if there are no others, I think we're asked to do three things. And the first is to note the intervention. And I think this is the first meeting where intervention has been on the agenda. And, you know, I just want to say that I'm kind of horrified that we've got here. We shouldn't have got here. And it was avoidable. And I kind of accept that Councillor Gledhill stood down as leader of the council, did the honourable thing. But what I'm not getting a sense of, genuinely, from elected members and some senior elected members, is kind of an understanding of just how catastrophic this situation could be, or actually is. What I'm not picking up is any kind of contrition about what's happening, any kind of apology to the people of Thurrock, any kind of apology to those of us who have been kind of raising red flags about this for the last 2.5, 3 years. And that's not a question to Jonathan or anyone else. It is the first time that we've had the opportunity to discuss this. So I just want to put my feelings about it very clearly on the record.
Can I just bring in Councillor Snell?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think to start off, I've been in the job for about a week now, and I've got my first meetings with the Directors Board and everything next week. But I think what this does show already in this meeting is that what we're trying to do now is bring as much information forward as possible to get the kind of debate that we've had tonight, which is, been quite insightful. We had some really good questions and really good points have been raised. I think that's helpful going forward. I think in relation to Councillor Kent's point just now is that one of the things I've picked up almost straight away is we are still in a position where we're trying to find out what went wrong and why. We don't really know that yet. We are in the process of finding that out, and we probably won't know for sure all the answers until the BVI report comes back in January. We might not even know them all then. But what we as administration intend to do and promise to do is that each step along the way, as more information does come to light, we will bring that to all 49 councillors. That's what we intend to do. So that we can see the process, everybody sees the process, and everybody can tell what went wrong, where it went wrong, and if there's any blame or any contrition to be had, let's find out the facts first, and then we'll deal with all that later. I think it's far too early just yet to go into the blame game to find out who's responsible for this, that or the other. We will get there, we definitely will get there, but we're not there yet. So let's have some patience with this. There are no easy decisions to be made. That's also number. The accounts are, to say the least, chaotic. We know that. We are where we are, though, and we have to make the decisions that we're going to have to make. And again, as we make those decisions, we will bring those to the 49 as well. I'm quite sure that decisions we make are not all going to be popular. It might be that none of them are popular, but we've still got to make decisions to keep this council on as even a keel as we can, and that's what we intend to do. So, as I say, hopefully I'll be able to come back with some more depth and some more information in the coming weeks and months, but just for now, let's wait and see where we end up. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? I mean, it is worth pointing out that this administration is actually determined to be open and transparent. I mean, that is the way we are going, and we will be working solidly with all the 49 councillors as and when the information comes out, as Councillor Snell's pointed out. Councillor Muldoon.
On that point, I think I'd just like to say that about time, you know, and we've been waiting for over 2 years now for some openness and transparency about this. So I just have to say there's still a lot of people in Cabinet. I mean, the finance person who sort of oversaw this, and Councillor Gledhill, who stepped down as leader of the council, but then was still in this new Cabinet, have only just resigned and gone away from that Cabinet. We've still got lots of members of the Cabinet who have sat in Cabinet listening to finance report after finance report and not really asking any questions or doing any scrutiny during that time. So it's really going to be actions speak louder than words at this point in time, certainly for us as elected members, and I'm sure the residents of Thurrock would echo that sentiment as well.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely take all that on board. But I think the leader is probably the one to actually make the announcements as and when he needs to going forward. I don't think it'll be very long. He's very proactive on this, and it is an absolute cast iron guarantee from him that he does want to be very open in the way we're going to go forward with this. So, again, as Councillor Snow has pointed out, a little bit of patience is needed. The facts are going to come out in due course, and all members will be kept aware and knowledgeable of everything that is coming out. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Well, I think we've heard enough tonight. So if I can then just move to the recommendations, please, found on area 1.1, 1.2, 1.3 on page 22. Can I have a show of hands if we want to approve those, please? Agreed. Thank you very much. Can I now move to item number 6? It's the Digital and Customer Experience Strategy, found on page 49 to 66. Can I ask officers to present a report, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, and could potentially say now for something completely different, but so we're pleased to present the first combined digital and customer experience strategy. And some people recall this brings together two of the Council's key strategies that were separate prior to now. It provides a strategic framework that sets out the Council's digital ambitions over the next few years and brings together a programme that's designed to transform service delivery, ways of working and the customer access channels. The report sets out 4 themes. So we've got Digital Thurrock, which is about the place and actually supporting and driving economic growth through a digitally connected borough. And then we have Digital Customer, which is where the main elements of access to services and providing better and improved and where possible 24/7 access to services through the most appropriate channels for our residents. Digital Office, which is driving internally a digital culture where we use technology to improve the ways of working, drive efficiency and also ensure that our staff have the relevant tools and skills. And then often the hidden element, which is the digital foundation that provides us with that reliable infrastructure that keeps us secure, safe and operating. Paragraph 2.3 of the report sets out the outcomes we're aiming for These do provide some context in terms of the transformation of the organisation, and digital organisation also relates quite strongly to the budget, and where we will drive some of the, hopefully, the efficiencies and the savings to maintain services to as many residents as possible, but also make sure we target resources at the most vulnerable people and those that need us most. I'm not going to go through the whole report, obviously, but obviously welcome the committee's feedback, input, questions. This has been widely consulted internally so far, so we're keen to get members' feedback on this in advance of taking it to Cabinet later this year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, very interesting going through that. Technology is not one of my strong points, I must confess. But yeah, really the one thing I think most of us are actually going to point out, through discussion is, we've all got concerns of how elderly and people that are not so sort of au fait with technology, how they're going to be brought up, and their service access is going to be improved as well. It's very, very important that we never ever lose sight of that. It's I've got relatives, even younger friends, that really, really don't live too comfortably in this new digital age. So, we really do need to sort of bring them up with us, and I'm sure other people might bring this up as well. And the other thing I'd like to say, it was on page 63. I mean, I've obviously gotten remarried recently in a Mulberry Suite, and I found the staff to be incredibly helpful. We did use a stream service to a bridesmaid in Somerset on the day. And I'm very, very pleased to say it worked out perfectly, and there was a lot of effort gone into that, I know. But can you expand on how the new business plan for the registration service is going to move forward? And what would you be looking to improve the live streaming service, and how? How can you improve that?
Thank you. I wasn't expecting that question specifically about registrars. I think that was a really good opportunity actually to test that facility, and I think it does demonstrate how things like Teams offer all sorts of new avenues to explore and to do things differently, including things like wedding ceremonies. So now the registrars is completely moved from the Thameside complex into this building. We are able now to kind of refresh our approach and how we market that service, including the citizenship ceremonies, as well as kind of weddings and other activities that we can offer, which will include that streaming service. And obviously, people who've got family and friends abroad and things like that, it does offer a kind of added sort of benefit, particularly for that service, but certainly an opportunity to explore use of that technology within other services as well. But now the move into this building is complete. A real kind of opportunity to include that as part of the offer that we have for residents who want to get married here.
Yeah, it was very recognisable for us as well. We can really see the opportunities and how these things can be sort of moved forward, especially like you say, now we're in the new building. We can provide such a much better service now and an experience for the day. So that's great. Are there any other questions? Councillor Maldoni.
Thank you, Chair. In 2019, the government produced a report about digital exclusion, and at that time they estimated that 10% of the population is digitally excluded. It's not just about people not having devices or being able to afford broadband, although obviously those are both factors, but it's also people like my mum who has got an iPad but can't really use it to access services in the way that other people would be able to. So it's sort of digital exclusion by lack of training or lack of understanding of how the devices actually work. I think there's been some evidence to suggest that Thurrock may actually be in a worse position than the national figure of 10% digitally excluded. So I think I subbed on this committee the last time this strategy came up, and my question is the same again. This move over to a completely digital customer experience, what do we do about those that are digitally excluded?
Yeah, I mean, one of the prime focuses of the strategy and the approach is to make sure we don't exclude people. So one of the elements that is mentioned in here, but we're also using in the background, was all of the work that went on around the consultation around the health and wellbeing strategy, which also, that issue in terms of the fear of being digitally excluded and the level of digital ability also came through as a strong theme. That where this strategy focuses, and by combining the two, I think strengthens our approach to that. So where people are able to interact and self-serve online through digital channels, we will promote that, we will make more available, and we will encourage that. But actually making sure that we provide the alternative channels and those backup channels to those that can't. So it's actually combining a range of things to make sure that we're not excluding people. We haven't unfortunately got the stats in relation, but a lot of work has been done about it, so we can follow up with those in terms of the position that's basically been baselined within Thurrock. The other aspect is, I think from a wider service perspective, is if people are digitally excluded or they don't have the digital ability, it's not just council services that actually potentially they're not accessing. There's a much wider sort of service impact from that we need to look at from a wider sense, because it won't just be us that they can't access through digital solutions. It's lots of other elements in just normal day-to-day life. So actually encouraging and supporting people to achieve some digital ability will also be part of the approach.
I mean, just as an example today, I'm not asking you to take this up as casework, but just as an example today, I've spoken to 3 residents who are basically digitally excluded. One's registered blind, so, you know, can't use the internet, and they've all been having immense difficulties getting a response from the council on a range of issues. So that's why they've come to their local councillor. And certainly I can say there's been, since we got rid of the face-to-face customer service and when the council was closed during COVID, there's been a real uptick in casework that comes through. We're then told to send people down the digital channels, but it's really not always appropriate. So what backup systems are in place? Because as I understand it, there's no face-to-face customer service, there's a bank of computers and there's telephones downstairs. How can you claim that's an enhanced experience for residents that are trying to make contact with the council?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have the contact centre, and we don't refuse to help anybody that calls about any service, even if the online service is available. So if someone is vulnerable and rings up, even if they've had trouble trying to do something online, the customer service advisors on the telephone will help or pass people through to the back office, but the majority of the time would be able to help a resident. You know, as an example, something like bulky waste, you can absolutely do that service online if someone wasn't able to do that for whatever reason, but particularly if they were vulnerable and weren't able to use that technology, call the contact centre and the team will arrange that for them. Downstairs now in reception, yes, there are tablets and the direct dial phones also through to the contact centre. We also have direct dial phones to the contact centre in all the libraries. So if someone's online in a library and struggling and one of the volunteers isn't able to help them, you can literally pick up the phone and be talked through by a customer service advisor how to access an online service, or again, they will make that offer for them. Most of the inquiries that are coming in, so the residents that are coming in to the reception area, the person on reception, the member of staff, will look to help them. We're dealing with kind of council tax inquiries, housing matters. So people are coming into reception, and again, if they're able to self-serve and able to use the tablets, then we will certainly make that available to them. And again, they can go through the contact centre. So it's as Jackie said, it's absolutely not saying everything will be digital. It's offering some level of choice, and we hope that those who can would use the digital channels. So actually, the resources available to us are absolutely targeted to those who most need them. So I would certainly say use the contact centre. I know I've sat in the contact centre and listened to calls. We've helped people set up email addresses for, as Jackie said, access to other organisations and other services as well. So it's very much about trying to enable and provide that direct support if it's needed. So we wouldn't turn somebody away on the phone if they needed that help and weren't able to do it themselves online.
So can I just clarify that people are still able to come into the council and talk to somebody face to face?
Yes.
If needed. Okay. I'll let people know that that's a possibility again. I think last time this report came through, that obviously wasn't clear. And the other thing I just wanted to ask is, so on page 57, you're talking about customer experience, and you describe it as this is the impression people have of the council when they contact us or use a council service. What work has been done to find out what the impression is? What is the impression of local residents about the council and council services? What work has been done to quantify that, and what were the results of that work?
It's done in a variety of ways. So through direct engagement and conversations with particular service users and user groups through individual services. We've also done some research through the contact centre. So we've actually spoken to customers at the end of their calls. We have a standard kind of satisfaction sort of survey that is absolutely optional, that people can give feedback on as a kind of recorded message. But we've also done some specific research where we've asked people actually why they called rather than went online, and how their experience was. And we know we've also looked at kind of complaints data and kind of end-to-end experience. So we have a sense of where, as an initial contact is made, that kind of end-to-end journey, and we know that in some cases we don't always get that right. So there's quite a lot of information at service level, but also through the customer services team, literally asking residents about their experience and having that conversation about their feedback and things that we could do better.
Could I just pick up on something that Councillor Muldowney just said? I mean, I've actually been into the offices quite frequently over the last month, 5 weeks, sometimes every day actually, and I quite often lunch with a new cafe down there, and it's quite evident actually there are a lot of people coming into the foyer. There have been occasions where all the tables are taken and people are clearly engaging with officers. Obviously I'm not knowing what people are talking about, but it is busy down there, and I have been here first thing in the morning, late in the evening and lunchtime, and it's very often it's the same case. Not always, but very often. So it is being used.
Yeah, got a couple of kind of general points, then some specifics, and I'll just start with my old one really. I hate the word customers being used when we're talking about residents. Customers suggests choice. Our residents don't have a choice who sweeps their streets or where they get their parking permits from or who empties their bins. So I just think it's a misnomer, and it's not something that we should be doing. I do think this is just so important, and I just go back to the old story that everybody's heard about renewing your car tax. So you go back probably 12 years now, and everybody did it by post. DVLA decided to move online. They didn't insist that people did it online, but within 3 years, 96% of people were renewing their car tax online. And they did that in a really subtle way, not trying to force people to do it. And I think that we do too much trying to force people to do things and not enough bringing people along with us. Whether we like it or not, there are a number of people in Thurrock who are digitally excluded. They're not only elderly people, some of them are younger. One of the things that became really evident during the pandemic was that one of the reasons that many kids in Thurrock weren't doing their learning from home wasn't necessarily that they didn't have a device, it's because the family couldn't afford the broadband. And we do need to just make sure that we're not further excluding people who are already excluded. When it comes to the elderly, I think the elderly are more kind of clued up than we sometimes give them credit for. Lots and lots of kind of 80-year-olds are very conversant on Facebook because it's how they keep in touch with their grandkids. So I think you are pushing an open door, but again, there are things we can do. Why aren't we making sure that every shelter complex in the borough has a free Thurrock Council Wi-Fi network, just to save people that little bit? Why aren't we running projects that encourage neighbours to share their data with neighbours who perhaps can't afford it? Why aren't we just looking at that kind of shift? On the face-to-face customer service, anecdotally, and it is anecdotally, I know of people who have been told, you need to go to the screen there's nobody to help you, go to the library. And we've ended up with people presenting as homeless, talking to library staff, with library staff helping them to register. And I've had that both from residents and from library staff. So it's certainly something that happens. On the call centre, I've had some examples of absolutely fantastic service, which I've always, when I've got it back, copied to the Chief Executive so that she's able to congratulate the people who have gone above and beyond. But too often, it's the opposite, where people don't get the help they need from the contact centre. And I just wonder what the mechanism is for just making sure that we are keeping proper tabs on what's happening there, so that we can really kind of dig down into the level of service that's being provided. There are too many places in Thurrock that are still broadband poor. East Tilbury, for example, Wattswood, I believe, and I'd like to see what we're doing about that. Nobody wants a kind of aerial mast somewhere near where they live, but you can't get a mobile phone signal on much of Shafford 100. You know, that's just crazy. And that kind of thing also needs to be addressed here. And finally, again, it's process. We're told that there's been lots of internal consultation on this, but no external consultation. When does the external consultation happen? And how are you going to consult with those people who aren't online? You know, I heard an answer there earlier that said people can always phone the contact centre. You know what? It's more and more difficult to find a phone number nowadays unless you're online. How do we actually give those numbers out to people who haven't got them? And how are we going to consult with people that are hard to reach and are digitally excluded?
Thank you, Councillor. And I will actually just come back to you. I mean, if I did refer to customers and not residents, you're absolutely quite right. That was a slip. I do apologise for that. Councillor Carter, I think is next.
Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Kent was more speaking about the report where it says customer experience here. When I was nodding, I was agreeing with him, not disagreeing with you as such. But I do think both Councillor Kent and Councillor Muldowney there raised some very good points about the call centre as such. And I wanted to come in, could we get any data on that to see, like I've had surveys myself as a council tenant, and I would be very interested to see how many were met with a satisfactory response. Like, I found some really quite nice call handlers who have always gone above and beyond, and I've had at one time one who just gave me the feeling he wanted to end the call as soon as possible. So, Councillor Kent is right that there is a difference in it. So it'd be really interesting if we could see those statistics from the call centres and how well this council is doing in relation to events, queries over the phone or calls we make as well. Thank you.
Councillor Anderson.
Thank you for the report. Going forward, what kind of engagement strategy do we have with council staff? Because if we're going to be introducing new IT infrastructure, maybe new software packages, obviously it's them that are going to use those in order to provide a service to residents. So what are we going to do going forward to make sure that, you know, when we introduce them, they are working and they are delivering?
Yeah, excellent comments, and thank you for all of this feedback. In terms of the sort of approach we take to the implementation of technology, there's a range of engagement mechanisms we use. So we have, I won't list them all, but we've got a range of staff networks representing specific groups. We've got directorate working groups. We also have change champions. So we've got a whole network of change champions that then actually engage with staff in different services. And what we're also working on is another network of digital leads, which is people that basically advocate digital solutions and encourage people to use them. So there's a whole range of different mechanisms that take place. We've got some specifics happening around the larger projects like 365, which is all the base technology and all the new modules and tools that comes with that in terms of working with specific groups in directorates or working with specific groups on specific modules. So there's a whole different range of it, of engaging with the workforce, and also using them to test it and actually learn from it, and we feed that back into the sort of introduction of the technology and improve it as we go along.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Sorry, Chair, I was just going to come back on a couple of Councillor Kent's and other points, if that's okay. The feedback survey on the calls, we get about a 99% satisfaction level, but I'll get that at some numbers around that, so how many people are and how that's worked out. More than happy to provide some more detail to the committee on that. The contact centre is also independently accredited. So we are part of the Customer Contact Association, which is a global organisation. A number of huge private sector organisations have that accreditation. That is independent. They listen to calls. They speak to members of staff. So that's quite a rigorous annual process that we go through as well. Just Councillor Kent's point about the consultation, and for those that aren't able to access things digitally, we would certainly use and work with colleagues through the voluntary sector, through the CVS, in terms of speaking to specific groups. I think it's really key, and we've certainly been working with portfolio holders around not just speaking to the same groups and the same people. And obviously there are different access issues for different communities and different groups. So I think going out and speaking to those groups about the approach and some elements of the strategy will be really important. And I think I'm going to look at Andy in case I'm making this up. I don't think I am, but I know there's been a programme through the work we're doing across South Essex. And I think one of the examples in Thurrock is one of the sheltered housing complexes that I think now does have or will be getting Wi-Fi access. So I think that they are things that will be very much part of the delivery of the strategy and the implementation going forward. And then just finally, kind of welcome the kind of feedback. The area downstairs hasn't been open for very long, and certainly support for those who might find themselves with housing difficulties and homelessness has been one of the kind of key services that we have been offering, not just appointments but walk-in. So if that experience hasn't been as it should be, then I'll definitely take that away as an action as well. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. It's very interesting. Thank you for taking us through that. It's clear to see that there's an awful lot to be done in this area over the forthcoming years, and it's and it is obviously really absolutely essential that we do cater for the residents and all of the residents' needs as we move forward over the next couple of years. So there's going to be lots and lots to come. Thank you very much for that. Thank you. If there's no more questions, doesn't appear to be. Can I then take us to recommendation 1.1 on page 50 to approve, please?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. I think the last item is item 8, the work programme. Must confess, don't have too much knowledge about how to construct a work programme, but obviously had a look. There are, I think there's 5 or 6 items already on the work programme for the next meeting.
For December.
I would assume that that's probably plenty for now, and there's probably going to be plenty to talk about in the next meeting anyway. So I would assume we'll be leaving it at that. Is everybody okay with that? Yep, appears to be. Thank you. Okay, so I would like to close the meeting now. It is 26 minutes past 8. Thank you everybody for joining us. Been some great questions. Have a good, safe journey home. Thank you.